Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Rishabh and I am going to read and only read for you all guys almost all the chapters of 9th Icse. So let's begin. So today I am going to read chapter 7, Medieval India, the Cholas. So let's begin. The southern part of the Indian peninsula, situated south of the Krishna river, was inhabited by Dravidians. They had their own language and culture. This region was home to three powerful kingdoms, the Cheras, the Pandyas and the Cholas. The most powerful of the three were the Cholas. The Chola Empire, which arose in the 9th century, brought under its control a large part of the peninsula. The Cholas developed a powerful navy which enabled them to develop India's sea trade in the Indian Ocean and to conquer Sri Lanka and the Maldives island. By the end of the 9th century, the Cholas defeated the Pallavas of the Kanchi and the weakened the Pandyas, bringing the Tamil country under their control. Sources. The important sources of information about the Cholas are the following. Inscriptions. The main source of information for the history of the Chola period is the large number of inscriptions of that period. Rajaraja I received the idea of prefixing to his inscription the main achievements of his reign. The example of Rajaraja was followed by his successors as well. Consequently, there exists a formal record of the transaction made by each Chola ruler. The inscriptions of the Cholas are in the form of copper plate grants, stone inscriptions and inscriptions made on the walls and pillars of temples. The copper plate grants known as Anbil and Karandi as well as Kanyakumari stone inscription give a long list of rulers indicating the origin of the Chola dynasty. Another set of copper plate contains 31 copper sheets. These plates are written in Sanskrit and Tamil. They record a grant made to a temple by Rajendra Chola I. The inscriptions provide the following information about the Cholas. They tell us about the Chola administration. For example, the Uttar Merur inscriptions gives information on the village administration, taxation and land revenue. They record gifts and endowments to temples and brahmanas. Copper plate inscriptions are the records of grants of villages, plots of land or other privileges to individuals or institutions by the Cholas. For example, the Leiden grant, so called as they are preserved in the Museum of Leiden in the Holland, of Parantaka, Chola and those of Parakesri, Uttama Chola are among the most important. They inform us about the construction of a temple or the setting up of a new image of the deity. Some inscriptions have royal orders on taxation and land revenue, resolutions of village assemblies, judgments delivered against persons guilty of theft, murder and other crimes. Inscriptions on temple walls served the purpose of public registration such as the record of sales, mortgages and other forms of transfers of property rights in the village lands. The Briddheshwar temple. The Cholas built a number of temples. The gateway of a temple was called Gopuram. The main shrine was known as Garbhagiri. Here the images of gods and goddesses were kept. These images were made either of stone or bronze. The mandapa or the audience hall was placed where people gathered for prayers. It was built in front of the main shrine. The chief features of the Chola temples are their massive viramanas or towers and spacious courtyards. The best example of Chola temple is the Briddheshwar, also known as the Raja Rajeshwar temple, dedicated to Lord Shiva. It is located at Thanjavur and was built by Chola king Rajaraja I. It is one of the best specimens of Dravidian style of architecture. Main structure of the temple has a great virana or tower which rises to a height of 190 feet. It is crowned by a massive dome consisting of a single block of stone, 25 feet high and weighing about 80 tons. The massive temple building is covered from the base to the top with sculptures and decorative moldings. The shrine houses a gigantic Shiva Lingam cut into a monolithic rock about 8.87 meter high. The temple has many structures such as Nandi Pavilion, a pillared portica, and large assembly hall. The Bridhaveshwar temple is the finest monument of a splendid period of South Indian history and the most beautiful specimen of Tamil architecture. The temple has been declared as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. Political history. The Chola ruler Vijayalaya established Chola rule in the temple land with Thanjavur as his capital. During the middle of the 9th century, after his death, his grandson Parantaka I became the king. He conquered Madurai and defeated the Pandyas and the rulers of Lanka. By the 11th century AD, the Chola power had reached the height of its glory. Rajaraja I and his son Rajendra Chola were the two prominent rulers of this dynasty. Rajaraja I was a brilliant general and campaigned in many directions. He attacked the kingdoms of the Pandyas and the Cheras as well as parts of Mysore. Rajaraja annexed parts of Deccan and overran Vengi. He did this in order to prove the strength of Chola power. He took some territories of Mysore, Travancore and Kurug. The courts of Kerala, Ceylon, Sri Lanka and the Maldives Islands had become rich through the money that came to them through overseas trade. India sent textiles, spices, precious stones to West Asian countries. The people who came from Western Asia to trade in these goods were the Arab merchants who exchanged money for goods. Foreigners brought wealth to India through their trade. Rajaraja was aware of the importance of controlling the sea. He decided to show his strength along the coast of South India. So he took out a naval expedition and attacked both Sri Lanka and the Maldives Islands. He conquered the northern half of Sri Lanka. He built the Rajeshwar temple of Lord Shiva at Thanjavur. On the walls of his temple are inscribed the main works of Rajaraja I. Under his rule, the Cholas became the supreme power in southern India. The increase in trade brought prosperity to their kingdom. Cholamandal. In fact, the word Coromandel has been derived from Choramandal. Rajendra Chola. Rajendra succeeded his father Rajaraja I. He continued his father's policies. He invaded and annexed the whole island of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka was not able to free herself from the Chola control for another 50 years. Rajendra's campaign were daring. Once his armies marched up to the east coast of India through Odisha and up to the Ganga river, Rajendra Chola himself led the army up to the Godavari and thereafter his general took the charge of the army. The Chola army defeated Mahipala, king of Bengal. To commemorate this victory, he adopted the title of Gangaikonda and built a new capital called Gangaikonda Cholapuram. His most daring campaign was in Southeast Asia. For centuries, Indian merchants had been trading with various parts of Southeast Asia and southern China through the Straits of Malacca, which was held by the kingdom Srivijaya, modern-day Indonesia. As the merchants of Srivijaya began creating problems for the Indian merchants appealed to Rajendra Chola for help. He sent out a huge navy and defeated the Srivijaya king. As a result, Indian trade with Southeast Asia and southern China continued, thereby greatly enriching the Chola kingdom. He built magnificent palaces and beautiful temples and his new capital, Gangaikonda Cholapuram. The Chola administration. The Chola system of administration was highly organized and efficient. The king was the pivot of the administration and all the authority rested in his hands. Central government. The king was the most important person in the Chola administration as all his authority was vested in him. But he had council of ministers to advise him. The king often went on tours in order to keep a check on the administration. The officers were paid by giving them assignments in the revenue bearing lands. The princes were associated with the ruling sovereigns and actively employed in the peace and war. The central government looked after external defense, internal peace and order promotion of general prosperity and cultural progress of the empire. Provincial government. The Chola Empire was divided into mandalams or provinces. These were further divided into Walunda and Nadu. The princes of the royal family were appointed governors of provinces. Local self-government. The Cholas were good administrators. They believed in local self-government. In many of the villages, the administration was carried out not by the government officials but by the villagers themselves. These villages had three types of village assemblies, namely the Ur, the Sabha and the Nagaram. There are long inscriptions on the walls of some of the village temples giving details of how the Ur and the Sabha were organized. The Ur was the common type of assembly of the villages where the land was held by all classes of people who were therefore members of all local assembly. The Sabha was an exclusively Brahmin assembly of the villagers where all the land belonged to Brahmanas. The Nagaram was an assembly of merchants and belonged to localities where traders and merchants were in a dominant position. Villagers who owned land were chosen by a vote to the council. The life and the work of the villages were discussed in these councils. This was a source of popular strength because it united the people. All affairs concerning the village, such as collection of taxes, settlement of disputes, allocation of water, were looked after by the committees. The temple in the Chola kingdom was the center of the social activity. It was not only a place of worship but was also a place where people gathered together. Some temples owned huge lands and participated in inland and overseas trade. The lands donated to the temples were known as the Devadiya or the Devadena. In some cases, instead of giving land to temples, land revenue of certain villages was assigned to the temple and the concerned villagers were instructed to pay land revenue in produce and in gold to the temple, the treasury. The temples were also the biggest employers after the state, providing work and means of livelihood to a large number of people. The temples used to take care of the welfare of its workers by providing food, clothing and housing facilities, and by arranging proper education and establishing hospitals. The temple was also a center for education. The priests of the temple were the local teachers as there were no separate schools. The schools were housed in the temple courtyard. The students learned their lessons in two languages, Sanskrit and Tamil. The religious teaching was in Sanskrit since texts such as Vedas had to be studied. The students learned Tamil, the language which was widely spoken in the Chola kingdom. The Tamil was influenced by Sanskrit and gradually incorporated a number of Sanskrit words. The revenue. The revenue of the Chola kingdom came from taxes on lands and the produce of the land and tax on trade. Part of the revenue was kept for the king. The rest was used on public works such as the building of roads and tanks, on salaries of officials, on paying for the upkeep of the army and on the building of temples. The taxes on land were collected by the officials from the village councils. The Chola art. The Chola rulers were great conquerors and efficient administrators. They loved art and architecture. They built temples, canals, roads, cities and palaces. Most of the Chola temples were built in the Dravidian style. Early Chola temples were simple structures. Later temples became bigger and more grand. The art of making stone and metal images had made more rapid progress under the Chola rulers. The Cholas excelled in making images of gods and goddesses. The bronze image of Lord Shiva as Nataraja, the Lord of Dance, is an excellent work of art. The image of Nataraja has been described as the cultural epitome of the Chola people. So that's it for today, guys. This is the end of the chapter of the reading Chola. If you like my channel, consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.